Damage Theory versus Smogon History. Was Mega Lucario actually good? First, a little bit of backstory. Mega Blaziken, Mega Gengar, Mega Kangaskhan, Quick Band in Pokemon X and Y. The first suspect test, February 16th, had Mega Lucario banned with a 94% supermajority. The Smogon community saw this Pokemon as a major threat, and a lot of Timmies in the Pokemon community were also not a fan of going up against this Pokemon. So we are going to take the deep dive. We're going to look at Pokemon from the time, see how they hold up and compare to like modern power creep and stuff, sentiment, move sets, breakdowns, and of course the damage calculations that reveal if Lucario is good or not. And then we can also kind of see the ban logic and bring it back into everything we have learned in this video. So if you enjoy it, don't forget to leave a like, share with your friends, comment your thoughts down below. Also, very special announcement. We are back with G Fuel. Use code VERLICIFY, 10% off your G Fuel order. Hold up. I was just told that my code is now 20% off always. With a deal like that, you gotta get some G Fuel now to celebrate. It is the best way of showing your support for what I do, and there's been a crazy amount of great flavors introduced since I last had the sponsorship. In my opinion, G Fuel has the best energy drink flavors out there, so grab what looks good to you and give me your recommendations because there's so many flavors to try. A lot of people say, hey Verlis, how do you make so many videos? How do you keep up that content grind? Lots of caffeine, lots of energy drinks, and G Fuel is top tier for gaming and content creation and going into crazy meta game development theory craft like this. So yeah. Mega Lucario. I don't even know where to begin with Mega Lucario because we have to go back almost a decade and accurately figure out what was going on in the metagame and how Mega Lucario interacted with it. Let's start with the stats and see how the stats feel compared to modern Pokemon. So we have 145, 140, 112. No item, but adaptability, and adaptability effectively being a life orb. That would go from 1.5 times stab damage to 2x, so we're getting that 0.5 extra, so 30% damage. And then it's like these stats with a life orb Pokemon. Compared to modern Pokemon, we have Pokemon like Fluttermane, Iron Bundle, which are super fast, have a lot of damage, have the freedom of an item like a Choice Specs, or could even go Life Orb. Damage Theory has exposed that Life Orb is fraudulent, but do these numbers just kind of show unacceptable damage even by modern standards? Also, a lot of other interactions and things to break down. It's already getting a little wild. So here's an idea of a Lucario moveset. We got Swords Dance. That way you can set up if you see the opportunity for a free turn. And that's pretty much going to end the game on the spot. One thing that felt a lot more common back in Generation 6 than any other Pokemon generation were 6-0 sweeps. All it really took was 1 or 2 turns, the right Shell Smash, the right Swords Dance, the right Nasty Plot, and you can run over an entire opponent's team. Now, that could also just be inexperience. So we've seen a lot of players just get better at understanding Pokemon and not letting themselves get set up against and chumped so easily. So you deny the free turn, harder to 6-0. But if it still happens, especially if like we're thinking about all the anti-tank, anti-setup stuff that's happening in modern Pokemon, you could probably find pretty good opportunities even with Mega Lucario back in Generation 6. And then the game's over if they don't have anything faster than 112. This is where things get weird, because in Generation 6, like, the further back you go in Pokemon, the more speed actually mattered, because you just didn't have the filthiest tanks, or people weren't playing tank strategy, except for me, which still looks to be the most optimal back in the generation. A lot of weirdness to unwind and break down here, but we are building this Lucario profile. That way, when we get into the damage calculations, we can see if it was actually nasty or not. But yeah, like, Swords Dance ends the game. However, that's also true of a lot of Pokemon, even modern. Earthquake, that's going to help with your Bullet Punch close combat coverage. We have this, Fighting Steel Ground, add all that in. Get resisted by Gyarados, which is kind of interesting. That's like, yeah, Gyarados got a lot of popularity in Generation 8, mostly Dynamax, but it's always been a strong Pokemon. Talonflame was a threat, Zapdos was a threat, Charizard Mega, a really interesting Pokemon, because it seems like it took until Omega Green Alpha Sapphire for Mega X to get like super duper scary, but even then Charizard Y just kind of starting off pretty good Pokemon, so it kind of depended on the coverage right there. Lucario could run a few other things like the Crunch hit Ghost type Pokemon. Remember, Gengar had Levitate at the time, so you couldn't just Earthquake out into the Gengar, and then like some weird stuff with Focus Sash could happen with the Gengar. The matchups get really weird the further you go back. We have Iron Tail, Hone Claws. Like, this seems more like a modern idea that people might throw, because back in the day, people ran Focus Mist and then were treating the damage calculations like 100%, and then using that like, oh, Lucario has no counters because it can just Focus Blast on a special mix, and then you lose. Same thing with Iron Tail, giving you a lot of extra damage, and then it's like, oh yeah, a 145 using above 80 base power, that's strong. But then Crunch doesn't give you any adaptability, and you're just a 145 without an item using an 80 base power move. That's terrible, unless super effective, damage calculations, fun stuff like that. Hone Claws, if you're just going like Hone Claws, Iron Tail, that's fine. Like, you don't need the Swords Dance if you're just getting the accuracy on this and buffing your close combat. So, just kind of ran Lucario like this, sometimes extreme speed. It was another like move slot syndrome-y kind of Pokemon to where there was still a good chance that, oh, I wish I had this move instead. And then your Lucario folds like paper because it's not that crazy. Now, 70-88, not as frail as you would expect for something like this. That was the thing about Megas, that Megas didn't always overtune the offensive power to the max like we see with modern Pokemon. And even though it feels like a waste to get defensive stats, it kind of prevents you from getting one-shot and pulls you closer to that Silvally damage analog. We also have Special Lucario, could also go a little bit mixed. This is where things also get really weird, like, oh, Naive Lucario, max special attack, maybe you have a close combat, uninvested 145 because adaptability is nasty, or Sphere, Flash Cannon. Hidden Power existed. I don't know what the best Hidden Power was on that, but yeah, you can just go like Hidden Power Ice, Hidden Power Electric. The moveset on Lucario, extra weird. So, Mega Lucario was banned for Pokemon X and Y, but it did get stronger with move tutors in Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Just gotta like look at the moveset for Pokemon X and Y. Didn't really have too many crazy extra options. Like, yeah, the Earthquake kind of pushes it over the edge, and there's always people that go, wait a second, Lucario gets Earthquake? Even then? Even now? Okay, that's kind of weird. We have like Dragon Pulse options for Special Lucario, or something like that. Dragon Pulse, though, non-adaptability. And that's the thing about adaptability. You get the Life Orb and the bonus stats, but only on stab moves. So, some weird stuff right there. Blaze Kick was a thing, so having that fire in there possible. Bullet Punch was like the annoyance of the Lucario, so that's how you had to breed Bullet Punch if you wanted competitive back in the day. So we got some nostalgia as well. High Jump Kick, a little too risky to run. Close combat is fine, especially because like super effective hits or like high damage moves we're going to KO you anyways, so the defense drop doesn't matter. It's about, hey, I outspeed you, I take you out, GG easy. And then we had the Omega Ruby now Sapphire tutors. Ice Punch, huge. Thunder Punch, huge, especially for like Talonflame or those other Pokemon we're talking about, even though Gale Wings makes the interactions interesting. And then like even a Zen Headbutt tech if you needed that for Poison type Pokemon. So yeah, has stuff, and then got Drain Punch, and maybe had like some of the weirdest stuff possible. Nasty Plot for a special moveset. It could set up in also 6-0 with that pretty easily. We had Copycat for shenanigans, Reversal. That was mostly like regular Lucario or Prankster Riolu. So just shenanigans inside of this, but getting a little bit more options with Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, and then this. This is what your Lucario looked like. Now, what about the Pokemon of the time versus Power Creep? And this is also where it gets a little weird, so I'm like mixing Oras and X and Y, even though Lucario was banned in X and Y, and then like doubles, but just kind of saying like, hey, we still had these Pokemon around, and we still see them even today. So Amoonguss gets used in singles, even with Regulation D for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. There's Garchomp, there's Greninja, there's Scizor. So we have all those Pokemon. Cresselia and Thundurus never go away. Heatran top 5. I don't think Landorus is good, and I think Landorus was also fraudulent back then, but like Landorus still top 10, so you have a nice spread in Zapdos. Like Zapdos actually just finding like weird, tanky annoyance things, and some of these Pokemon being stronger back in the day, because Zapdos could just stall you out, sub-Toxic Roost, nothing you could do about it. Now, I'm not saying that you toxic stall the Lucario to win the game or something. I know that Steel-type Pokemon can't be poisoned, but I feel like I have to add this into the video because someone's desperately going to try to debunk my argument. What I'm saying is, Zapdos was very usable and very used back in the day, and it can also just not care about Lucario's moveset, hit it with a discharge, Lucario gets paralyzed, and then Lucario's removed from the game and didn't get a chance to do anything. Breloom, also a common Pokemon. So, like, these Pokemon exist and existed, and then depending on if you played like Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, still Generation 6, or X and Y, the Dex interactions got weird, but they were also Mega Pokemon. So you give up your 1 Mega for Mega Lucario against Mega Venusaur, which was good. Mega Charizard, which could also just like end the game on Dragon Dance or something. Alakazam just mostly wanted to still have like a Focus Sash or something. Mega Gengar, Mega Kangaskhan. We are not acknowledging the Smogon Bans because it's a fun format for casuals with made-up rules. So if we're just talking about raw X and Y strength, you know, these Pokemon actually very overrated. So maybe Lucario is kind of in the same vein. People were picking up the Pinsir and doing like shenanigans with quick attack Aerial 8 Pinsir. And if Pinsir doesn't get one-shot by a Bullet Punch, which it shouldn't, then we actually have a lot of damage threat onto the Lucario. We talked about Gyarados. You can come in for the Intimidate. You can also, like, maybe soak a move with your Water Flying coverage. Going Dark into the close combat, not great unless you're, like, trying to finalize the KO. But there we go. Like, Gyarados comes in, sets up a Dragon Dance, then switches over and might have KO pressure on the Lucario. Then a few other Pokemon, some that we saw, some that we didn't. Mawile, a lot of Mind Games. Aegislash, unnerfed. So there were good Mega options, and like I said, there were just ways of instantly ending the game on some kind of other Swords Dance Pokemon or other setup. So let's see what the damage theory is on the Mega Lucario. Scarf Chomp versus Mega Lucario. How much damage does the close combat do? Jolly adaptability, not a KO. This is my live reaction. I didn't set this up beforehand. I honestly thought this was going to KO. I thought it was going to be like, wait a second, Mega Lucario actually crazy? Maybe it didn't get its full potential realized because, like, it just one-shots Garchomp on a close combat. But no, the 108, 95, I think that means, like, Silvally damage analog gets, not 195, gets close. Actually, no, low chance to KO. So if you have just a fully dedicated tank Pokemon or a Pokemon that finds a setup before Lucario lands, actually, the Swords Dance trading gets a little weird, so Lucario still can win out in those. It just kind of shows, like, common Pokemon of the time just dealt with Lucario. Also, this is Earthquake Scarf Chomp, so you just come in, outspeed the Lucario, and take it out. Now, one thing that seems to have gotten less important over time when it comes to competitive Pokemon is switching. So, like, this would be one of those cases where it's like, yeah, the Lucario switches out into either Flying Pokemon, Talonflame being common, absorbing the Earthquake, but then, like, Garchomp could predict that through a Rock Slide. So, a lot of, like, weird prediction interactions, but not a lot of Pokemon. Once you just come in and eat 2 Earthquakes, because, like, okay, you switch into a tank, but then, like, Earthquake, that Pokemon's not having a good time either, and you still haven't Mega'd, and they've Mega'd and kind of shown their hand on what the Pokemon wants to do. We also have Bullet Punch. So how much damage does the Bullet Punch do to a Garchomp uninvested, not even Tank Chomp? Very little. So, like, that means Garchomp can also be softened up, just kind of come in, outspeed, have a lot of tempo on its side. Interesting. Now, the big thing I want to see is Alakazam. What happens with Alakazam versus the Bullet Punch? Not a KO. Like, that was another thing I was thinking. I'm like, okay, so now there's just, like, absolutely no response whatsoever because Bullet Punch, like, KOs Alakazam. No, Alakazam just has the outspeed. Now, does it have the damage with something like the Psychic? Also makes me wonder if maybe Alakazam is, like, the only viable Life Orb Pokemon ever. But no, this is damage theory. This is damage theory right here. A 135 special attack or just physical attack, a 135 Pokemon using your average power move into the average tank Pokemon with Life Orb is a 2-hit KO, or it's a 2-hit KO. And this is why Expert Belt is fraudulent as well, because you're either already KOing with the super effective hit, the 20% doesn't matter. So yeah, Choice Specs gets it. The close combat actually having the KO is a surprising amount of damage, but that just kind of shows, like, yeah, 145 Pokemon, Life Orb with 100 plus. Okay, now we're actually seeing Life Orb being viable, and it's just like that power of having high base power moves really just like tilting damage theory to a crazy degree. But like, no, the specs Alakazam responds to the Mega Lucario. So I think the thing is, Mega Lucario has damage and does the damage. And if you can't take the close combat or close combat bullet punch, you are in a lot of trouble. But now it's the 112 speed. So I think, like, in a weird way, Mega Lucario would be stronger today as just like an adamant wall breaker or a Swords Dance just like setup Pokemon where it's like, yeah, it does some weird mixy set or has like just enough health investment to do a thing, and then does a Swords Dance into a Garganasalt setup and then one-shots an entire team or something. Yeah, that could be a problem. So unless I screwed up something, like I sometimes do with the Pokemon Showdown damage calculation and a lot of the moving parts, level 50 doesn't really change anything, even though it adds a little bit of damage. So Mega Lucario just kind of looks like it was a balanced sweeper. You outspeed it with a Scarf or a naturally sweeping Pokemon, and then these stats don't really matter, and even though like the adaptability Bullet Punch sounds nasty, you don't have an item, so you're just a 145 using a low base power move that doesn't KO even the most frail, squishy, sweeping Pokemon. And maybe the thing was that, like, okay, it was really common, so it was annoying to just kind of have Lucario be the Pokemon that 6-0s you if you were going to get 6-0'd anyways. Or maybe it had a bit more proficiency with a wider variety of just, like, KO combos and stuff like that. But... And maybe we were in more of a tanky, stally kind of position where people wanted to set up their tank Pokemon a little bit, but then the Swords Dance just ends the game. And that felt really bad against Lucario. But it seems like this Pokemon, with the Pokemon of the time, was just possible to deal with. And if we introduce more Pokemon as Generation 6 expanded, like the legendaries from Mega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, Lucario just kind of like falls into place. Looking into some other matchups, we have Thunderbolt with a favorable chance to KO, but it's not super reliable. However, the Bullet Punch doesn't really threaten the Jolteon too much. So, I mean, your Choice Specs Jolteon outspeeding everything, finishing off a Lucario, or just outright KOing it, or making Lucario in a, like, priority, you know, it can get Bullet Punch, it can get Extreme Speed, it can just kind of even eat a Sucker Punch and get KO'd after eating a Thunderbolt from Jolteon, or Jolteon finishes it off, and now you have a Specs Jolteon that outspeeds everything in the meta that only lost 30% of its health, so it also isn't going to get priority, and then lands another Choice Specs Thunderbolt. I think this also kind of, like, shows some other interesting things from time, because talking about Life Orb being fraudulent, felt like everyone was really crutching a Life Orb back in Generation 6, even though it wasn't doing anything. And now with modern Pokemon, Choice is very viable. It's like, oh, but you're locked into a move. Nah, everything is banded specs and trying to get the most damage for the one-shots. So if we were playing modern Pokemon Idea with the Pokemon of Generation 6 into Lucario, actually not as big of a threat. But let's see what the ban logic was and if we can take it down. Lucario has always been a fan favorite, so it was reasonable that its popularity netted it a Mega Evolution. But nobody was expecting Mega Lucario to be such a monster. Stat-wise, Mega Lucario already had the makings of a truly threatening sweeper, as a 145, 140 mixed offense is crazy, and 112 was ridiculously fast at the time. Actually wasn't. We just kind of like showed the Alakazam and the Jolteon dealing pretty well. What about Dugtrio? Because Dugtrio is like hyper frail. Yeah, much like the Alakazam, the damage just slightly isn't there. Also, Lucario getting like revenged into a Focus Sash Pokemon. If the Focus Sash Pokemon has a super effective hit, a Flamethrower or something like that, can take out Lucario really easily, and then like if Lucario gets KO'd, then it doesn't have the Bullet Punch to anti the Sash on the next turn. So yeah, there's just actually like good sweeping balance here. It demolishes everything below it, can get scarfed out from underneath, like with a Garchomp or maybe a Indeef Speed or something that has good amounts of power. Actually, okay, Mega Lucario wasn't entirely fraudulent. It can survive an Earthquake from a Jolly Scarf Tyranitar that's outspeeding it. If this broke down, then it's like, okay, yeah, Lucario's just terrible. But with this, okay, yeah, like not every crazy idea beats the Lucario. I mean, if you find a hard-hitting Pokemon or a stab super effective hit against Lucario from above 61 speed, Scarf was viable. Already finding like some kind of +1 speed setup was viable. And then just a lot of Pokemon faster than it brought a lot of threat because the Bullet Punch just wasn't quite there on the damage. Lucario's move pool was also pretty lethal, as it had stab priority moves in Bullet Punch and Vacuum Wave to overtake anything that happened to be faster, except we just debunked that. So one of the leading ban reasons for the Lucario, actually just completely false. Close combat was a powerful physical attack, that is true. As we talked about, high base power gets a little screwy with damage theory, and then Aura Sphere, Flash Cannon, pretty good. Nasty Plot, Swords Dance. But again, like, a lot of Pokemon could just set up a Swords Dance in the game, or a Nasty Plot, or even like a Calm Mind, or do some weird tankiness. So I don't think that is again, yeah, Lucario is just a sweeper. Congratulations. Now, all of these traits made Mega Lucario seem like a top tier threat. We're forgetting a certain trend that I've pointed out in the past 3 Pokemon I talked about. Oh yeah, the ability. So Game Freak didn't think Mega Lucario was powerful enough. Well, this isn't powerful enough. No item 145, 112? That doesn't really hold up even by old school non-power creep standards. So I thought they were already factoring in these crazy offenses with adaptability. The adaptability is what brings it close to the edge, but also doesn't tip Lucario over the edge, as we just saw with the damage calculations. But really, adaptability made what was already an extremely lethal Pokemon into an unstoppable force once it got momentum. Well, now you're just giving Lucario momentum for free, and as Smogon does, free Stealth Rocks and maybe even a couple of other setup things in there, ignoring the opponent having the ability to also set up and also prepare for the Mega Lucario. But that never happens with Smogon logic. It's never a neutral or realistic game state. It's always the best case scenario for the Pokemon they want to ban, and the worst case scenario for the opponent, therefore Pokemon needs to be banned. But this doesn't make any sense, because the 145 Pokemon without an item is not lethal, especially at 112 in Generation 6, when there were also other Mega Pokemon that had a lot of crazy speed. And I'm also wondering if there's maybe even an angle where it's like, oh, Mega Lucario should be unbanned in Omega Green Alpha Sapphire because of all the other threats being introduced. But no, instead, Smogon logic of ban everything and be wrong about the logic still happening back in Generation 6. So factoring adaptability, we over-exaggerate the Pokemon without an item-based power, need an explosion that doesn't kill the user and can hit things super effective. Mega Lucario has that covered. Let's not forget Mega Lucario has Swords Dance and Nasty Plot. Do I even need to go on at this point? Yes, because not a single point has been made. If I told you that people actually defended this thing, oh, that classic Smogon elitism and condescension, you would think I was lying, but there are in fact people who opposed a ban, and for a rather underwhelming reason. Lucario needed to Mega Evolve before it could start wrecking teams, as its middling defenses and low initial 90 base speed would leave Lucario vulnerable to many of the faster hard-hitting foes out there. Right! Even in my breakdown of this, I was giving Lucario the 112. But it didn't have that. Like, that was a change that happened in Generation 7, where Megas got their speed the turn they Mega Evolve. But here, you're stuck with your base speed. However, this argument had little to no relevance against stall teams, as not much of anything at the time was outspeeding Lucario. Lie? And Lucario... However, this argument had little to no relevance against stall teams, as not much of anything at the time was outspeeding Lucario. Yeah, on tanky stall teams. So, once again, like, Smogon just being a decade behind in modern Pokemon, not understanding how much anti-tank, anti-stalling is out there, congratulations. Lucario is your average Gen 9 Pokemon. Not even a busted Gen 9 Pokemon, just like your average Pokemon in Generation 9. Wait a second, older Pokemon are actually holding up in these kinds of metagames, so it's not, like, again, it's not like, oh, Mega Lucario is even busted by today's standards. Nah, it's just a wall breaker. And because Smogon liked their stall and liked playing bad strategies, they would get run over by the wall breaker. Yeah, if you lead Lucario and the opponent goes Ferrothorn because they're going for their, like, trash Stealth Rock setup, you win the game. Mega Lucario is free to do whatever it wants. It can just close combat immediately, or it gets a Swords Dance and then wrecks the entire opposing team. But that's on the opponent's fault for having a terrible lead, having a terrible strategy, thinking entry hazards are good, and then playing a team that gets run over by a 112 Pokemon with no item. Okay, I'll give Lucario a little bit of credit for not getting one-shot by the Adamant Choice Band Gale Wings Talonflame on the Brave Bird, but Flare Blitz still just, like, completely takes it out. Would be better if you just had, like, the Brave Bird be a guarantee. Adamant doesn't outspeed the Talonflame, so Bullet Punch can sneak through here, but if we're going like Jolly or something, or maybe even Life Orb, Flare Blitz is still going to be pretty good here. So, or we go Jolly Talonflame, and then we just have the outspeed on Flare Blitz, Bullet Punch, plus the recoil isn't enough. Talonflame still has the ability to use moves afterwards, and can still be a threat. So it seems like a lot of Pokemon had the opportunity to 1-for-1 plus against the opponent's Mega Pokemon. It could even revenge kill a sweeper with an adaptability boosted priority move. So this argument is relatively invalid, except that's just wrong. Alakazam is one of the frailest things to ever exist. Do I have to like plug this in just for my own sanity? Did I get something wrong? Or is the entire ban logic of Mega Lucario just a lie? Alakazam, a 55-45 Pokemon, eating a physical adaptability Bullet Punch. Jolly nature, that's correct, because like if it was adamant, then more things outspeed it like a Gengar, and that makes everything weird. 145, adaptability, all of this stuff. Bullet Punch comes through. Alakazam's fine. What about Stealth Rocks even? We'll give the Stealth Rocks to Lucario. Guaranteed 2-hit KO after Stealth Rocks. Also, Alakazam could go like Magic Guard or something. So, Alakazam could do some really funny stuff, I guess. Yeah. So it doesn't even have the revenge argument on Lucario. I thought it was going to be mixed Lucario, too hard to deal with, but Sweeper Pokemon deal with both Lucarios, and even a Lucario that's set up with a Swords Dance or a Nasty Plot. I guess like Alakazam can't eat the +2 Bullet Punch, but there's some Pokemon out there that can. Jolteon, Talonflame, they eat the +2 Bullet Punch. Scarf Chomp eats the +2 Bullet Punch. So, at the very least, it forces out the Lucario that is no longer a sweeping threat because it loses the stat boost when it switches out. Let's look at some other Pokemon. I want to see a defensive Mega Venusaur against Lucario. Lucario just doesn't have damage. Like, Lucario could set up a Swords Dance, and Venusaur still gets 2 hits against it. And, like, things get weird. So we have, like, Hidden Power Fire. Venusaur didn't have what was it, Earth Power at this time. That was a modern buff to Venusaur, but even then, like, you could Leech Seed, Synthesis, Hidden Power, or something into a 1 Swords Dance Lucario, and then take it out, or deal with it. And Hidden Power Fire isn't even like an, oh, you need this tech, and it's a stretch for Mega Lucario. No, Hidden Power Fire was very common because of Ferrothorn, Amoonguss, and Mega Venusaur mirrors just being a complete stall fest, since you couldn't Leech Seed each other, and then there's also, like, Sludge Bomb resistances and immunities. So yeah, the Hidden Power Fire, kind of a must, and you can just 2-hit KO the Lucario on that. You can even, like, do something like this where you remove the speed creep and switch things around on the stats, and even though it's a level 50, you'd want, like, 20, and the numbers get kind of weird, but yeah, like, you could just deal with Lucario with your own Mega Venusaur, and now you have a stall threat, or just, like, Leech Seed, Sludge Bomb, whittle down the opponent, Synthesis. 1-for-1 plus. Lucario gets 1-for-1 plus by tons of Pokemon. I guess it's not even like they used the Greninja counter logic. That had to wait for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire when they made up that nonsense. Where it's like, well, if Mega Lucario is both physical and special and mixed and has all of its potential natures with every potential moveset, Swords Dance and Nasty Plot at the same time, can't respond to it. Except that's a lie, because then Alakazam comes in and responds to it. What about the Amoonguss? Because, like, yeah, you could just eat a hit and Spore. We drop this down to level 50, and then we have, like, full bold... Oh, yeah, we even had Regenerator. Not even talking red card, we have, like, Black Sludge, so we can even, like, heal up as we're doing those shenanigans. Now, Amoonguss not being as powerful as the Mega Venusaur, but still gives Mega Lucario a lot of problems with the Spore. So it's like, eat a hit, Spore, Synthesis back up, and then you could, like, chip damage on a Giga Drain or its own, Hidden Power Fire, and then still, like, gain on Lucario that can't sustain and is asleep. And also, this is what I mean by, like, a 145 attack Pokemon that has to run a Speed Nature without an item just not being a threat. You don't get that adaptability, and then Earthquake neutral does nothing. You're better off with the close combat. Also, on the Venusaur matchup and the Amoonguss matchup and other matchups, I'm not even factoring, like, yeah, Lucario used the close combat already and is now just, like, one-shot by everything. So this actually gets even weirder, to where there might actually be an angle to where, like, you get hit with the close combat, Spore back, and then between, like, Giga Drain on the -1, that's not a 3-hit KO, but I mean, like, 4-hit KO is kind of weird. You're healing some of this, and then you're getting Black Sludge. you might actually, like, shrug off a close combat, and then it has to close combat again. It's like, you can shrug off a close combat, or synthesis, or something, and then, like, gain on Lucario just by sending out an Amoonguss, or sending out a Venusaur. Am I missing something? Was the damage calc just different back then? We have Crunch as an option as well. So I want to see, like, Crunch into Cresselia? Frick, I don't even know what default moveset to do on this one. Level 50, but I mean, like, okay, Moonblast isn't two-shot. Calm Mind gets kind of weird. Crunch is a 3-hit KO. So, I mean, like, Swords Dance into tank setup gets kind of weird, but does take time for Lucario to kind of get online in this way. So now we also have, like, chipping onto Lucario, or some revenge situations, or if Lucario comes in to respond to Cresselia, and Cresselia gets, like, a Calm Mind. Wait, why is this timid, speed-invested Cresselia? I guess it's, like, a Generation 9 moveset, but, again, it seems like it's just bad team building and bad strategy that gets you rolled by okay Pokemon like the Mega Lucario. So we can do that, we drop down to level 50. That changes the numbers quite a bit. And then, like, Calm Mind set up, so we go +1, +1. We have, like, stored power in here for damage. Maybe a Key Berry, and that makes things kind of weird. Key Berry is pretty good, and then, like, yeah, you just get that one extra boost. Or if Cresselia, like, uses Calm Mind, Lucario's like, oh, I got this, I'm gonna switch in and Crunch. Just kind of lose the game. And Calm Mind, stored power, Key Berry, Swords Dance, like, Lucario doesn't get it. And now, like, we have an incredibly threatening Cresselia. Am I missing something? I don't really see it for the Lucario, and then people are going to say, oh yeah, but special, oh yeah, but mixed. But now we're dealing with less damage. We're dealing with less special attack and less base power, so then the numbers get even worse for Lucario, and then it's like, oh, Nasty Plot Vacuum Wave. Well, we just kind of saw everything survive that, and Pokemon like Alakazam and Jolteon have higher special defense than defense, so there could just be better responses to it. Yeah, like, and this is kind of just fraudulent because it's less damage, and this is the Unga Bunga roll you over, but again, a lot of sweepers did that, and Lucario could easily lose that momentum. Also, there were other Mega Pokemon and other threats you could run. What about the Mega Mawile? Max hit points, max attack, Adamant Mega Mawile. That's how you ran it, because you just go like Swords Dance, Sucker Punch. Play Rough just KOs. Nothing else. No other shenanigans, no mind games. You don't have to be like, oh, do I need to like Iron Head and then Sucker Punch or weave in a Swords Dance? No, you just survive the close combat from the Lucario, and then you play Rough It back, and it gets KO'd. Because Mega Lucario is that much of a threat. Also, Mega Mawile, another one of those Pokemon where if you gave it a turn, it wins the game potentially. Also, Move Tutor Mega Lucario gets weird because the Thunder Punch into Skarmory, because we don't have the adaptability, just does not matter as much as the neutral close combat. So some of the matchups you would expect, like, yeah, I want the Thunder Punch, I want the Ice Punch for this, just kind of still loses out to close combat. And this actually looks more scary into a Skarmory. So we have Bold, Max Defense, all of that stuff, Rocky Helmet on the Skarmory. I think you're actually fine with the Iron Defense, so then, like, Swords Dance shenanigan trading gets kind of weird, but it's like, yeah, Iron Defense comes in, you take 50, and then you can kind of roost back up, and Lucario's wrecking itself on a Rocky Helmet while making itself more frail. So even if you have to, like, sack a tank Pokemon, Lucario is forced out because it made its defenses, like, giga negative, or it's just going to be able to get picked off by something, and you're still not using your Mega to respond to it. But okay, like, Skarmory, the premier defense tank, actually struggled a bit. Or maybe this is why Smogon Timmies were getting rolled, because, like, yeah, I've got my Skarmory, I'm going to go Stealth Rocks, and I get my Stealth Rocks, and then Lucario takes a little bit of Rocky Helmet damage, and that's how we trade. But then Swords Dance Close Combat means game's over. So you probably don't want to have this matchup into Skarmory too much, but there's at least, like, an option. And if you ran the Drill Peck or Brave Bird Final Sack, like, you could put some damage on Lucario. So, like, Lucario is just going to accumulate damage at some point and become a 1-for-1 plus, or a sometimes, maybe semi-frequently 2-for-1 Pokemon, but then you bring in your Mega and you reverse sweep because now their Lucario threat is gone. So don't get chumped by Lucario and it's just okay. If we kind of jump ahead into the future a bit, we can see a lot of similarities with the Greninja ban. That Smogon team building was just garbage back in the day. These kids, they were just in the NPC Hive Mind flavor of the month, and they didn't know how to make good Pokemon teams. So if their Landorus was threatened by anything, or if their Ferrothorn and their Stealth Rocks were getting set up against harder, then they just needed to ban it so they can play the Pokemon they want, which is now just like completely casual, completely removed from Pokemon, and doesn't have any competitive integrity whatsoever. And then it's only gotten worse since then as we get into modern Pokemon. Like I said, Smogon players are a decade behind compared to modern Pokemon. They're just finding out about like some of the most basic concepts, and if we apply like modern ideas into this, yeah, like there's no argument for Lucario being ban worthy at all. A lot of it was based in lies, and even the ban logic kind of ignored like the potential that you get mixed up on with a hybrid Pokemon. But even hybrid sweeping hasn't held up into modern Pokemon standards. Verlicify, always right. So if you guys enjoy the video, hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.